We see a San Francisco rooftop. A door clangs open and we see a man on a tirade, showing some form of emotion as he insists he did not beat his soon-to-be wife. He tosses a can to the ground, grumbling about how they are lying, about how it's not true. He looks up, spotting his best friend, and suddenly, his anger dissipates. A smile crosses his face as he utters the all-too-familiar phrase, "Oh, hi Mark." The Room is one of the most infamous movies of all time, after gaining infamy due to an unexpectedly successful word-of-mouth campaign, which is actually attributed to Michael Russell from 5 Second Films. People love seeing this movie, despite an overwhelming majority of audiences decrying it to be terrible in every regard. And it's not just this movie, there are a plethora of so bad it's good movies. Plan 9 from Outer Space, Battlefield Earth, Food Fight, and my personal favourite, even before it became a meme, The Bee Movie. But why do people enjoy these films so much, even though they're so bad? Well, why don't we find out? Because this is Quarantined, a series of light-hearted video essays to distract us from the outside world, and today's question is, why do we enjoy bad movies? And I say we, this is of course not a universal truth. There are people who don't enjoy watching bad movies, who don't understand the appeal of watching something you know is going to be terrible. But for the rest of us, I thought we'd enjoy looking into exactly why we all like these terrible trash fires. And funnily enough, there isn't a lot of scientific research on why people gather to watch terrible movies. Like literally there's one study, it's called Enjoying Trash Films, and that's pretty much going to be our main source for the book of this video, until I throw in some original thoughts near the end. This study, like I said, titled Enjoying Trash Films, Underlying Features, Viewing Stances, and Experiential Response Dimensions, is split into 3 sections. 1. What are trash films? 2. Why do people like them? And 3. What kind of people like them? We're not going to delve into that last bit too much, but we might mention it once or twice. But let's take a quick tour through section 1 and see what adjectives people use to describe trash films. Actually, in this study, his part isn't called What are Trash Films, but what features and attributes do regular customers of films, which they consider to be trash films, associate with this label? But fuck me, you can tell he was gunning for a word count with phrasing like that. Jesus. Anyway, he began by asking participants to free associate and write down any word that they associated with the term trash movies. If 5% of participants or more wrote down the same word, or a word close enough to be considered the same word, like blood or bloody would combine into one entry, they were charted and organised by their popularity, and well, look at that. By a country mile, the term cheap was the most popular. And to quote from the study, as figure 1 shows, cheap turned out to be by far the most salient term. This confirms that cheapness is perceived the most single distinctive attribute of trash films. Cheap serves as a derogatory term for objects and actions to be considered of low quality, dumb, or clumsily executed, and even for modes of behaviour which are indecent, evasive, and morally dubious. This fits well the idea of trash as poorly made, aesthetically inferior films, characterised by the ineptness of their creators and actors, low cultural value, and morally offensive stances, and hence with the notion of trash as bad film. Notably, the adjective bad was also among the terms listed. On the other hand, it is quite possible that cheap primarily, if not exclusively, referred to the film's budgets. Given that low budget was also a feature among the most salient terms, this supports the identification of cinematic trash with cheaply made films in terms of finances as compared to Hollywood mainstream standard. It's that other hand that I think prevails in this case, particularly when you look at the results and find words like entertaining, funny, humour, or ironic. People clearly link the term trash genre to movies that are either low budget or even just appear that way. Movies like Suicide Squad, for example, are bad, maybe even unintentionally funny, but they are not trash. In the second part of this part, the interviewees identify films that they classify as trash, and, the usual suspects are all there: Plan 9, Sharknado, Killer Tomatoes. It's missing a few I would have clocked straight away though, weirdly enough. There's no The Room, there's no Battlefield Earth, there's no Birdemic. But hey, most of those interviews were German, maybe there's a cultural divide. Both Sharknado and Plan 9 are sort of canonical so bad it's good movies, given the former's meminess and the latter's entire film made about its director, but the remaining films on the list are all low-budget films that look like low-budget films, thus cementing the usage of the word cheap in the former part to mean, well, cheap. But in this section, there's a quote that I disagree with. Moreover, The identical salience of Sharknado and Plan 9 is revealing in yet another regard. While the former is undoubtedly a film intentionally made for ironic consumption and meets the criteria for parody or deliberate camp, the latter can be regarded as a prime example of failed art or pure camp. Thus, in our sample, the label trash is applied to both types of films. This gives rise to the question of whether and how habitués differentiate modes of trash, similar to camp, from those that are not. However, as we did not specifically collect data regarding how participants conceive the notion of camp, we cannot draw robust conclusions about the perceived difference between the labels. I'm going to loop back around to that point near the end, maybe, but so just keep it in your back pocket for now. Hide it away behind your ear or something, just don't worry about it. Part 2. Why do people like them? Here we go, the meat and taters of the whole video. This study states that people enjoy these movies, and why do they enjoy these movies? Well, based on the average means of the individuals loading on the components, an ironic viewing stance emerged as the most important dimension. This viewing stance involved ironic consumption and implies a positive re-evaluation of the films in question as good. Although trash films are primarily associated with cheapness, as discussed in the previous section, this does not translate into an equal importance of the attributions constituting the dimensions of low cultural value. In fact, this dimension only appears as the least important of the 5 dimensions extracted. By contrast, transgression turned out to be of preeminent importance for the conceptualization of trash. Critics and scholars often take aspects associated with transgression as characteristic of the European tradition of art cinema. From this perspective, it appears noteworthy that the mean ratings for transgression and art cinema do not significantly differ, whereas the mean ratings for mainstream proximity is significantly lower compared to the two. This may indicate that trash films are perceived to bear greater resemblance to art cinema rather than mainstream films. Taken together, these findings support the notion that trash films are predominantly consumed with an ironic viewing stance, and that the films are primarily conceptualized in terms of their deviance to Hollywood-dominated cinematic mainstream. It's ironic. Of course it's ironic. I could have told you that in like a few seconds. Of course that one came out on top. But that last bit is rather interesting. People like these movies because they are not Hollywood movies. In a cinematic landscape where everything is a remake or a sequel or a cinematic universe and they're all made by Disney, like holy shit, Disney accounted for like 40% of box office releases last year, seriously, what the fuck? So people are yearning for something different, a film made far away from the predictable story beats Hollywood 3-act structure. Sometimes they reach for a high-concept indie art house movie, and sometimes it's birdemic. The study then goes on to talk about the experiential dimension of trash films, which is a magnificent bundle of words that basically means what they felt when they watched. They had 34 words clumped up into 4 groups: negative emotions such as shocked and ashamed, interest such as attention, curiosity and surprise, emotional control, safety, protected, and finally, the amusement group, featuring words like relaxed, exhilarated, and well, amused. Unsurprisingly, amusement came out as the top dog. After all, people called them funny in the first section, remember? But at the same time, the second highest result being interest is, well, interesting. Given the fact that we've already shown that art cinema and trash films are kind of related in the previous point, the study posits that perhaps the people enjoy the two genres for similar reasons. Namely that you have to consider why the filmmakers made the specific reasons while watching both. Art cinema makes you think about that to determine the film's meaning, whereas trash films do that to try and figure out exactly how this film happened. In any case, besides fun-related enjoyment, interest-driven appreciation also plays a part in the trash fans' film experiences. To confirm this hypothesis, Sarkosh and his team ran some linear regression analyses to see how people answered these questions and definitions of viewing stance. I definitely know what that term means, I did not just quote it from the study. They found that surprisingly there was large correlation between amusement and ironic viewing. However, there was very little correlation between interest and ironic viewing. The people who were interested in these films rather than amused by them seem to like these films for their similarities to art house cinema, proving the point that we just made. I love it when that happens. So in short, people fall into one of two groups. Group A watches these films ironically for their own amusement, finding humour in the terrible decisions that the filmmakers made, or Group B, they watch the films and try to figure out exactly why the filmmakers made these movies. Me, I can fall into both camps, and most people might do too. Leave a comment, tell me which of the groups you're in. But now we're done with this study, which I think only really scratches the surface, because a large part of the enjoyment of these movies comes with the group viewing, in which I am confident a portion of those enjoyment factors in. And in fact, I managed to find a whole different study that agrees with that point. Part 3. Who do you watch them with? My theory is that half the fun of a So Bad It's Good movie is the experience. I don't know if you've watched one alone, but it's forgettable and boring. But when you're in a group, be it 100 people in a cinema throwing plastic spoons at a screen, or just a few mates and a few drinks, the fun gets magnified almost tenfold. You're all in the same space, experiencing the same thing, laughing at the hilariously bad acting and being collectively bewildered by the terrible decision making together, almost feeding off each other's enjoyment, the atmosphere in the room. And in 2014, Gary Scheitenberg conducted a study with the same hypothesis. They showed the same clip to 2 different groups. Participants in one group watched it in the room on their own, whereas participants in group 2 watched the clip in pairs with a divider between them so that they couldn't influence each other's reactions. They were then asked to answer questions about the clip in private, ranking their emotional reactions on a scale of -5 to 5, 5 being the most extreme feeling of a specific emotion, and -5 being the least. Their findings were, well, the current research found that group attention, the experience of simultaneous co-attention with one group's members, increased emotional intensity to relative to attending alone, co-attending with strangers, or attending non-simultaneously with one group's members. These effects occurred when observing a scary advertisement, negative and positive images, as well as happy and sad videos. Even when you can't see the person you're watching with, even when you're in total silence, you feel things more intensely when watching something with someone. So imagine how it'd be with a group of loud, like-minded moviegoers, or even your best friends, the people you already click with emotionally. It's going to be a massive difference, and you're remembering the experience and crediting the movie for being the catalyst for it all. Tommy Wiseau didn't intend to make the Citizen Kane of bad movies. He thought he was making something serious and groundbreaking. But what he ended up with has brought people together, given thousands of people great nights with friends, and become one of the most recognizable movies online. And that's pretty cool, right? So that's why people like bad movies. If you like this video like it was a bad movie, the like button and comment boxes are down there ready to be clicked and typed in. If you're new here, be sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you really like what I'm doing, be sure to visit my Patreon like all the lovely people on screen right now. And special thanks goes to the Fresh Cheese Bag of the Month, Karl Raade, Ethan Safron, Kozmosaur, Whatwouldjedido, the Magpie Magus, and NeuroticAnarchy. I'll catch you on the flippity flop, and love you, bye.